All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're taking a deep dive into a family tree, but not just any family tree.
No, not your average family reunion here.
We're talking about the British royal family,
A lineage that stretches back centuries.
full of twists and turns.
And enough drama to fill a whole library of history books.
To guide us through this royal maze, we're using excerpts from what else?
Oh, you know it.
The Wikipedia page on the British royal family tree.
Now, this page,
It's massive.
it is absolutely sprawling.
Kings, queens, marriages, lines of succession that get pretty complicated.
Where do we even begin with all this?
Well, the Wikipedia page starts with a certain king,
King James VI and I.
but it does mention some resources for exploring even earlier lineages.
For those who are feeling extra adventurous, you know.
But for our deep dive today, we're going to stick with James VI and I as our jumping off point.
It makes sense.
He's a pretty significant figure, right?
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Why is that?
He's the reason we're even talking about a single British royal family. You see, James was already the King of Scotland.
Yep.
And when Queen Elizabeth III of England died without any heirs, well, guess what? James inherited the English throne, too.
Two for the price of one.
Exactly. Two crowns become one, and boom, that's the start of our family tree.
Pretty impressive inheritance.
You could say that.
Now, I did notice something on the Wikipedia page, a little key to help us understand this visual feast we're dealing with.
Yes, a very helpful guide.
Can you decode that for us? What are we looking at here?
Of course. The names you see with the red borders, those are your British monarchs.
Ah!
And the names in bold, those are their legitimate children.
Okay, so a quick way to spot the major players.
Exactly. A handy visual shortcut to navigate this sprawling family saga.
All right, so we've got King James VI and I uniting the crowns and kicking off this whole dynasty. What happens next? Take us deeper into the House of Stuart.
Ooh, the House of Stuarts. Buckle up, because this is where things get really dramatic.
Oh, how so?
Well, James's son, Charles I,
Yeah.
he didn't exactly have a peaceful reign.
What happened?
He was executed during the English Civil War.
Executed. Wow. Not your typical family disagreement, huh?
Not at all. I mean, for a king to be tried and executed by his own people, that sent shockwaves throughout Europe.
I can imagine. It must have completely changed how people viewed the monarchy.
It was a turning point. It challenged the idea of an absolute monarchy, the idea that a king was above the law.
So it sounds like things were pretty unstable already. What happened after Charles I's execution? Did they just get rid of the monarchy altogether?
They did for a while, actually. England became a republic, but it didn't last.
And then
The monarchy was restored with Charles II.
I've heard of him. The merry monarch, wasn't he?
That's the one. Let's just say he had a, shall we say, a colorful personal life.
Ooh, do tell.
Well, let's just leave it this. Lots of mistresses
Juicy.
and quite a few illegitimate children. But politically, he was quite skilled.
So, a bit of a balancing act. Seems like he brought some stability back after a very chaotic period.
He did, but then his brother, James II, inherited the throne.
Okay, and what happened with him?
Oh, this is where religion really throws a wrench into things. James II was Catholic
Okay.
and England. Predominantly Protestant by this point.
I see where this is going.
It caused a lot of tension. A lot. And eventually, James II was deposed in what we call the Glorious Revolution.
Glorious because.
No bloodshed, thankfully. A relatively peaceful transfer of power.
So, another shakeup in the line of succession, this time driven by religious tensions. It really shows how this family tree is like a window into bigger historical trends.
Exactly. It's all intertwined. Politics, religion, power struggles.
Yeah.
It's all right there.
And I bet it doesn't end there. We've got more drama to uncover, right?
Oh, you have no idea. Because with James II gone, there were still those who believed they were the rightful heir.
The pretenders to the throne, right?
Exactly. And that's where figures like the Old Pretender and Bonnie Prince Charlie come into the picture.
Ooh. I've heard those names before, but to be honest, I never quite understood who they were.
Well, the Old Pretender was James Francis Edward Stuart, James II's son.
Okay.
He believed he was the rightful king. And so did his son, Charles Edward Stuart, better known as Bonnie Prince Charlie.
So, father and son both trying to reclaim the throne.
They both tried, yes, but they ultimately failed.
With all this turmoil and infighting within the House of Stuart, it makes you wonder how they held on to power for so long.
It's a good question. They had moments of strength and stability, sure. But in the end, they couldn't overcome those succession disputes and the religious tensions.
And that leads us to...
the next chapter of our royal saga.
Which is...
the House of Hanover.
Ah, the Hanoverians. I have a feeling things are about to get even more interesting.
Oh, just wait until you hear about the first Hanoverian king. He couldn't even speak English.
Wait, seriously? He ruled England but didn't speak the language?
It's true. And that's a story for our next installment.
All right, I am hooked. We'll be right back with more of this fascinating deep dive into the British royal family tree. Stay tuned.
You won't want to miss it. It's a wild story. All right, so picture this. George the first Hanoverian king, arrives in England ready to rule.
Okay.
But he doesn't speak a word of English.
I mean, that's got to be pretty challenging.
Right.
How did he even govern?
Well, he relied a lot on advisors and ministers.
Basically a team of translators and interpreters running the show.
Pretty much. It's fascinating to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd think knowing the language would be like a prerequisite for being king.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But it actually had some interesting consequences for how England was governed.
Like what?
Well, it actually helped to boost the power of the prime minister.
Huh, interesting. How so?
Well, since the king couldn't really communicate with parliament or his ministers effectively,
Right.
someone had to step in and take charge of the day-to-day stuff.
And that someone was the prime minister.
Bingo. So you could say George III's lack of English kind of shaped the role of the prime minister as we know it.
Wow, that's a pretty big unintended consequence.
History is full of them.
What about his successors? Were they also German-speaking monarchs?
Well, George II, his son, was also born in Germany.
Okay.
He did speak English, but with a strong German
I
accent.
can only imagine.
And oh boy, did he have his own share of drama.
Oh, this, I gotta hear.
You know, royal family feuds are always a good time.
Always. What was the drama with George II?
He had a major rivalry with his own son, Frederick, Prince of Wales.
Oh, so it's a father-son showdown for the crown.
Basically. It was all about power, as you might expect.
Of course.
Frederick was quite popular,
Yeah.
and some people saw him as a threat to his father's authority.
So a bit of a power struggle within the family?
You could say that. There were rumors of plots and schemes.
Ah, the intrigue. Makes you wonder what really went on behind closed doors.
The stuff of history books, for sure. Okay, so we've covered George II. Now on to the next Hanoverian monarch.
Who's next in line?
George III.
Ah, George III. Now there's a name that rings a bell. Didn't he have the longest reign of any British monarch before Queen Victoria?
That's right. His time on the throne was a period of massive change, including, that little thing called the American Revolution.
Oh, yeah, that. Of course, he's also known as Mad King George, right?
Yeah. Sadly, his struggles with mental illness are pretty well known.
It's a reminder that even monarchs are human, dealing with very real health issues.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that historical figures were real people, not just names in a textbook.
Exactly. So with George III's long reign, are we getting closer to the monarchy we recognize today?
We're getting there.
Yeah.
After the Hanoverians, we have the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha.
Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, that's a mouthful.
Try saying that 3 times fast. And this house later becomes the House of Windsor, which is much more familiar, right?
Oh yeah, the House of Windsor. Now we're talking. And this is where we meet, drumroll please,
The one and only.
Queen Victoria.
The Queen of Queens. I mean, she's practically synonymous with British royalty.
Her reign was incredibly long, wasn't it?
It was. Over 63 years, from 1837 to 1901. And that whole era, the Victorian era, was a time of huge change for Britain. Socially, economically, technologically, you name it.
She basically witnessed Britain becoming a global superpower, right?
Right.
With the peak of the British Empire and all that.
Right. And let's not forget the Industrial Revolution, completely transforming society.
She really saw it all. But there's another thing she's known for, hemophilia.
That's right. Queen Victoria was a carrier of the gene for hemophilia, which is a blood clotting disorder.
Yeah, I remember learning about that in school. How did that impact the royal family?
Well, she passed the gene on to some of her kids.
Oh, no.
And through marriages, it actually spread to other European royal families.
Wow, so this family tree isn't just about names and dates.
Well,
It's about genetics and how they can actually shape history.
it's a great example of that. Queen Victoria's case shows how genes can have real political and social consequences.
It's like a real-life soap opera playing out on a grand historical stage.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got the end of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha with Queen Victoria's reign.
Right, and then it changes to the House of Windsor. How did that happen?
Well, you see, World War I happened.
Ah, right.
And with all that anti-German sentiment.
Well, it would make sense to change a German-sounding name, yeah.
Exactly. So King George V, Queen Victoria's grandson, decided to change the family name to Windsor in 1917.
Makes sense. A little PR move to keep things smooth.
You could say that. So from Queen Victoria, the line goes through Edward VII and George V.
Right, and then we get to the king who gave it all up for love.
Ah, yes, Edward VIII. The king who abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson.
What a scandal.
It really shook things up. In 1936, he chose love over duty, and that had huge consequences for the line of succession.
Can you imagine a king just giving up the throne like that?
It was unheard of. But love can make people do crazy things.
So who took over after Edward VIII abdicated?
His younger brother, George VI.
The one who was Queen Elizabeth II's father.
The very same. He became king even though he never really wanted the job.
A reluctant king.
Pretty much. But he stepped up and led the country through World War II, which was obviously a hugely challenging time.
Talk about duty and sacrifice.
It seems to run in the family. And with George VI, we're finally on the doorstep of the modern monarchy.
His daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, she became one of the longest reigning monarchs ever, right?
She did. And she really shaped what people think of when they think of the British monarchy.
Her reign was remarkable, but even her family life wasn't without its share of drama, was it? She had 4 children.
Yes, 4. Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward.
Each one with their own unique story.
They've definitely all had their moments in the spotlight, haven't they?
Charles, as the oldest, was the heir apparent for a very long time.
He was.
Princess Anne seems to have dedicated herself to royal duties.
She has. She's known for her hard work.
And then there's Prince Andrew, who, well, he hasn't exactly stayed out of the headlines.
Yeah, his association with Jeffrey Epstein led to a big scandal.
It did. And then there's Prince Edward, who's kind of taken a step back from the spotlight.
He has. It's a reminder that even in modern times, the royals still face personal challenges and controversies.
Speaking of controversies, we can't ignore the big one.
The elephant in the room.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
Their decision to step back from royal duties in 2020 was a bombshell.
It was. It definitely got people talking.
It made people question the future of the monarchy.
Right, like, can the monarchy adapt to a changing world?
Exactly. Some people loved their decision, saw it as brave and modern.
Right, forging their own path.
But others saw it as a betrayal.
I can see both sides, to be honest.
It's complicated. But I think it really reflects how times are changing.
Right, especially with social media and the 24/7 news cycle.
It puts a lot more pressure on the royals.
For sure, younger generations might have different ideas about duty and tradition.
They do. What does it mean to be royal in the 21st century? That's the question.
It's a tough one, balancing the weight of history with the need to evolve.
Exactly. And the decisions made by the current generation, like William and Kate,
Yeah,
they will shape the future of the monarchy.
they really will. It's an incredible story, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you think.
From James VI and I, all the way to Harry and Meghan and William and Kate, that's quite a journey.
And we just scratched the surface, really.
There's so much more to this story.
So many fascinating little side stories we didn't even have time for.
To our listeners, if you're intrigued and want to keep exploring, I highly recommend checking out that Wikipedia page.
Oh, it's a treasure trove of information.
You could spend hours on that page just clicking from one link to the next.
You might even find a connection between the British monarchs and your own family history.
You never know.
Or maybe you'll just get lost in all the stories of, royal romances and scandals and political intrigue.
It's all there.
It really is. It's a reminder that history isn't just boring old dates and names.
It's about real people.
People with their own desires and ambitions and flaws.
And how they all fit into this grand tapestry of events.
Exactly. By understanding the past.
We can better understand our present.
And maybe even get a glimpse of what the future holds.
So next time you're reading the news,
Or watching a period drama.
or just chatting with friends about history,
Remember, there's a good chance the British royal family tree has something to do with it.
it's a story that's still being written after all.
And it's a fascinating one.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We've traveled through centuries of history
Explored the twists and turns of the British royal family tree.
and uncovered some pretty amazing stories along the way.
We hope you enjoyed the journey.
And until next time, keep exploring.